Welcome to the quiet place.
Thank you for having us. Sorry if I'm being quiet.
Us?
No,
Thank
we're
you.
not quiet. The name's ironic.
You said thank you for having us. Do you have a partner there?
Oh, no, I'm just multiple people. I self-identify as more than one person. No, I'm totally joking.
Okay. I thought you were serious for a minute. That
No.
would be okay, too. So I started reading your worldview review of Stephen King's It. It's
I'm
not...
sorry.
You're sorry? It's not stuff that I haven't heard before, but it's at least interesting, and it talks a lot about agnosticism and how, we are our own, essentially our own gods. We create ourselves and our own paths in life, and it's kind of wishy-washy to me,
Yeah, I would, just a slight correction, I wouldn't speak of it in terms of agnosticism, but of Gnosticism.
Okay.
Remove the A, and it makes a big difference.
That's what I meant.
I think that's what you meant, yeah.
So you're saying you're a Gnostic?
Oh, no, I'm saying that the tale is a Gnostic tale.
Oh, okay. So you're not promoting the things Jeremy's talking about.
Yeah, I don't get that sense at all that he's promoting it. He's
No.
Yeah, okay, just digging into the story. I can
Right.
kind of see that. Yeah.
Correct.
Now, that new book that you have out looks very awesome, and I'm actually going to download it tonight. The Giants According to Pop Researchers, and you're kind of, are you kind of like taking jabs at people like the Skywatch people, Thomas Horn, and then people like Jim Wilhelmsen, who we actually had on an earlier episode of this show? Are you kind of like going after them a little bit? Because I've always been really wary of a lot of those people's claims, especially regarding Nephilim hybrids, because the one like scripture they always point to doesn't seem to be saying anything about that. And I believe it's Matthew 24 or something. And then in Revelations, you never see anything about it either. So I don't really get why all these authors are literally spurging out about Nephilim alien hybrids when that's does not seem to be in the Bible. Maybe they're seeing something I'm not, but when I read through the New Testament, I definitely looked for it, and I never saw it.
Well, as long as we're also discussing authorship, of course, I'm a very different author than you are, so I was kind of looking forward to the perspective. So this is a book I actually wrote during the first weeks of the stay-at-home order. And I was laughing at myself because I noticed you talked about writing a novel in 12 days. And I thought, wow, that's quite an accomplishment. And then I thought, wait a minute, that's about how long it took me to write this most recent book.
How long is it? I saw that it had 2 volumes.
Well, okay, so for me, it was about a tremendous amount of research. And when I was finally ready to sit down and start writing, it just happened to coincide with me having tons of free time, right? So I was able to just pound it out.
That must be tough because, like, I'm attempting nonfiction, and it goes way slower for me, even if I have research done, because I feel like I'm constantly going back and, getting sources to put in my material. And that's pretty, I wouldn't say laborious, but it slows me down to where I'm not getting the same word count. Like I'm still getting about 1,000 words, but it takes me about the time it would take me to get probably 3,000 or 4,000 words of fiction done.
Well, I find that I have a healthy obsessive side. So if I latch into something that interests me, I can spend a tremendous amount of time in it. So there's parts of the writing process I enjoy tremendously, but there are parts that are just mind-numbingly grueling. It's just grudgery and just digging up. In this case, I plowed through about 80 books, and I took what ended up being 400 pages worth of notes. Quotations. And then finally, when I got down to writing, there was also a grueling aspect of, well, I want to make sure these guys, I'm presenting their views from their own mouth. So there's a tremendous number of quotations in the book, and just finding where to fit those was just mind-numbing, really, to the where at the end, you could probably read me a quote and I could tell you which author said it. But eventually, I just got down to writing my commentary around it. And so, since you asked a couple questions, one is, the way I publish, there's a page limit. So this one went beyond the page limit for a 6x9 book. So I published 2 volumes. But then I also published a one single volume size 8.5 by 11. So for those who like the smaller books, you can get the 2 volumes. And for those who don't mind a large one, you can get the 1 volume. So I think that worked out rather well. And yes, what it is looking at kind of going from the top down, some of the most well-known guys in this field of research at the popular level. So I want to emphasize that because I wrote another book about this issue, but from a scholarly level. So these are the main guys in this field who are known in the popular level, and just seeing what they have to say about certain issues, mostly Nephilim, giants, angels, demons, and then eschatology, or the end times. So it wasn't like everything you ever wanted to know about these guys and every single one of their claims, because that would just be overwhelming. But as an author, you know how you have to kind of set your parameters. What am I going to write about? And then you make the decision, and then that gives you the borders of, okay, I'm going to write about this. I'm not going to chase down 1,000 rabbit holes. So that's what kind of helped me be able to plow through like 80 of their books, not to mention the years worth of watching their videos and reading their essays and posts, and then saying, okay, these are the topics I want to cover, so this is what I'm going to focus on.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty neat because, when I got into Christianity or became a Christian, I don't like wording it like got into Christianity like it's a thing that you get into like a band or something, because it's obviously much more than that. But I was attracted to a lot of these guys right off the bat because I was also, into conspiracy theories and stuff. But pretty soon I started getting fed up with a lot of them. I like a lot of them, don't get me wrong. And I especially like a lot of Thomas Horn's stuff when he goes on about transhumanism and whatnot. But that one particular thing with the Nephilim always bugged me because it seems like so many of these guys, L.A. Marzulli included, he's kind of the biggest one, have their whole, everything, like their careers basically hinge on this thing. But I just never saw it in the Bible. Do you believe that in Revelations or in any of the other end times prophecies, like the part in Matthew that they always go back to, do any of them at all speak to like post-flood, modern day Nephilim or Nephilim hybrids?
Really pleased to see, remember on Facebook when you reposted my post and you mentioned something about that, and I was like, finally, somebody who gets me, gets where I'm coming from. We're going to disagree a little bit, but let me just go as I did in the previous answer, kind of from the beginning to the last thing you asked about. So I think these guys are absolutely fascinating. There's no question about it. I think these guys have done a tremendous amount of research. Again, no question about it. And yeah, they often traipse into the area of conspiracies. And that's one thing I'm saying I did not do in this book, is track down everything that they claim about everything. That just would have been overwhelming, right? So I think you're absolutely right that they have literally established quote unquote ministries on this topic, and then everything else they can latch it to. So for example, if they say, well, my big topics are Nephilim and giants, and I'm going to latch that to transhumanism, I'm going to latch that to aliens and UFOs, then guess what? I'm also going to latch that to, you name it. Even I have a subsection on how they talk about Bigfoot. You name it. And so what happens is, I'm thinking to myself, well, if I made my quote unquote ministry based around Nephilim and giants, how much would I have to do on a daily basis, much less a decade by decade, if not millennia by millennia basis? I'd have essentially nothing to do. So what can I do? Well, I'm going to latch it on, like I was saying, into all these other topics. So then I can claim that they're in my purview as well. So now all of a sudden, I can co-opt the whole field of ufology into nephilology. I can co-opt Bigfoot research. That's part of what I'm doing too. I can co-opt all of it, and I can claim it's all tied together. That's why you'll see, if you look on the left side of your screen, that represents the back of my book, that quote from Steve Quayle: "The understanding of Nephilim is the Rosetta Stone for understanding all of Scripture." Okay, now if you wrap your mind around that, it's really an astonishing statement. It's what's called a hermeneutic, meaning it becomes his worldview, whereby he then reads the entire Bible through the lenses of Nephilology, Nephilim studies.
Yeah,
It's absolutely unwarranted. It's shocking to me that he could not only say that, but that people would quote him approvingly in that regard.
yeah, it's so weird because a lot of the things that these people get into, I'm on board with. Like when you
Yes.
get into like the Jacques Vallée and all the things about the like the UFOs being more than like extraterrestrial things. Like I think this Gregor said they're like, or he was quoting something, but they're like modern day fae folk or something. Like they're just these abstractions in nature that are like trying to change our worldview. Like they're not really what they are. They're just trying to pretend or put on a mask. And I guess you would say they would be technically be demons or something. I'm on board with that. And I think research into that's really cool. But once they get into the Nephilim stuff, I think they try to make it too concrete. And the only way they can make it concrete and say that it's warranted is if the Bible backs them up. And I just don't see that. And that quote right there, I'm with you. That is it's unwarranted to look at the Bible or the Bible through the Nephilim lens, because they're only really mentioned, if I recall correctly, in Genesis, and they're out of the way very quick once the flood happens, and then there's a whole other part of Genesis. So I don't get why they get so hung up on Nephilim, and I truly believe I believe they may believe what they're saying. It's like a cool, almost fantasy or sci-fi like element, and it's going to sell more books, get more people interested, and I think that's why they latch on to it. It's just they're trying to force almost a genre into this thing that it's just not there.
I mean, I have a question. Ken, you probably know the answer to this. I'm interested to know what, say, the Orthodox Jew says about the Nephilim versus, say, the Catholic Church versus, say, one of these researchers, right? So, I mean, do you happen to know what it is that these various different, belief systems say about the Nephilim, what they are, what they define them as, what they believe that they actually were?
I wrote the book.
So, yeah, what do the Orthodox Jews say about the Nephilim?
Well, so let me again just kind of give you a long answer, because as you guys are bringing up different things, I just try to cover everything. So let's say one of these guys just presented to you their basic theory. I personally find it fascinating. I mean, it is like a very, very exciting and sexy sci-fi tale, no question about it.
Right.
And it's easy to get drawn into that because it is an exciting story. They sound like they're talking, like they know what they're talking about. And incidentally, a lot of these guys do end up writing works of fiction as well. Okay, but they always say, well, but my work of fiction on Nephilim and Giants is based on my real life research. So you see there's this strange, blurry line between
Right.
fiction and nonfiction. And I'm thinking, well, the reason they're so easily able to write fiction is because when they claim they're doing theology, they are essentially doing fiction already. You see.
I mean, that's certainly possible. Yeah.
Incidentally, if you get yourself, now I'm not talking about these guys anymore. If you go to Amazon and just search for Nephilim, you'll encounter hundreds of returns of books that are romance novels. It's like a cottage industry now.
Wow.
It's really, it's astonishing.
What do the Orthodox Jews believe about the Nephilim? What do they say it is? What do they say they were?
Well, by the way, you're speaking to a Jew right now.
Okay. Are you an
you're
Orthodox
a
Jew?
Messianic Jew,
Um,
correct?
Yeah, I'm a Messianic Jew.
Okay.
So basically, I'm Jewish, but I've come to recognize Jesus as the Messiah.
Okay, that's what I thought it meant. All right.
So
A
just,
Jew for Jesus is the colloquial term.
yeah, that works. So let me just give you just a little quick history of this book. This is, it depends how you count it. It's either my fourth book on this topic or the sixth one. It kind of depends how you look at it. So one of them that I wrote is who historically took what view of Genesis 6. So now we're talking either about what's called the angel view or the Sethite view, or what I call a miscellaneous view. And I basically showed in that book, beginning with a chart, and then every chapter presents which author wrote what about it, from the BC times up until the 500s AD. So I covered almost a millennia. That's the book right there. The Genesis 6 affairs, sons of God, angels or not. And so if you're interested just on who took which view, that's the book right there. So
Okay.
now there is an issue, and it's when you're saying, well, what view did the Orthodox Jews take? That's a bit of a difficult question, because especially if you're starting in the BC days, what is an Orthodox Jew, right? Are you talking about the Jews under the rabbinate, meaning the system of rabbis that came along, which is not in the Bible? That's something that came along later during the Babylonian captivity. And so are you talking about which main sect of Judaism? But generally, you had individual authors who did take the angel view, and then you have some later on, I'm talking pretty much later, who said, well, really, sons of God is a metaphor for noblemen, right? So it's really about different societal classes of people, like higher
Right.
and lower classes. But that's really a later innovation. The original traditional majority view amongst the earliest Jews and Christians alike is the angel view. And I mean, that's just a historical and verifiable fact.
Okay.
And it's that way, it's the majority view at least until 500 AD, where, yeah, go ahead.
So the Nephilim, it's my understanding, and I might be wrong about this. I haven't dug deep into it, but I do find it's a fascinating topic. So I thought the Nephilim were the offspring of angel and man. Is that correct?
Okay,
Or
so
they-
here's
okay.
where I'm gonna butt heads slightly with Zach. Okay, so
Okay.
here's my my takeaway. Like I said, okay, so again, just a little background.
Mm-hmm.
So that book there was about who took which view historically.
Right.
Then I don't want to rabbit hole, but then I have another book about the Book of Enoch where I also talked about these issues. Then I wrote one called "What Does the Bible Say About Nephilim and Giants?" Right. So there's the like I talked about earlier, an author, you want your parameter. So that book is about the Bible. Then I wrote one called "What Do Encountering Nephilim and Giants in Extra Biblical Texts."
Okay.
What do other ancient texts tell us about it? Then I wrote one called "The Nephilim and Giants According to Scholarly Academics" to see what they had to say. And now finally I'm writing one about the pop researchers. So if anyone's written about it, it exists, I've probably looked at it. So
Right. Okay.
to make another short question a long answer, my view is something that lands me right in the middle of the two extremes. And so I always end up being the monkey in the middle, getting beat up by everybody. So here goes. I do believe that the sons of God described in Genesis 6 were angels, and I do believe that they mated with human women. So I do believe that the Nephilim were half human and half angel. But exactly like Zachary mentioned, that was pre-flood. So then the flood comes along, and that's it. Goodbye. They're gone. They did not survive the flood. They did not come back, nor will they ever come back. It's game over at that point. End of story. So you see,
Why? Do you? I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No.
for what reason do you believe that that none of the Nephilim were spared?
because 8 people survived, and that was Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and the son's
Oh.
3 daughters. Period.
So the Nephilim weren't considered holy enough to be able to survive the flood, or to be able to be spared.
No, they were basically like abominations, and they were apparently
Okay.
evil too. Like they
Well,
weren't.
no. Okay, let me just interrupt for a second. If we're talking about what the Bible states, then
Yeah, there's no mention after the flood, is what you're saying, right? There's no.
no,
biblical-
I'm not. No, I'm not.
Oh.
I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
There are 2, count them, 2 references to Nephilim in the Bible.
Mhm.
Incidentally, it's pretty astonishing that to this day, millennia later, this is like a hot topic.
Right.
Based on on 2 verses, not even 2 texts, literally 2 verses, 2 sentences.
Right.
One pre-flood, one post-flood. We'll get to the post-flood one in a second. So the pre-flood one merely tells us who their parents are. That's it. And it tells us the Nephilim, where they became mighty men of old, men of renown. Period. That's it. You don't know what that really means, whether it means they were evil tyrants. You don't know what they look like, incidentally. We have no physical description of them in Genesis. We just know their parents, and we know that they became famous. They became well known. And again, we don't know how they became that way or what they were like as rulers. We don't know, period. We can assume a ton of stuff, and we can use writings from centuries and millennia later to fill in those gaps, if that's even viable, which I don't think it is. But that's it. So you can't really say anything about them pre-flood. Now,
Well, I thought that there was a sentence where it said that the nature was inherently evil, or that may have been the nature of people in general. Is that correct?
There's definitely no statement stating that that's a characteristic of Nephilim. It may have been.
So that was just talking about people, right? I think he said the nature of man was wicked or something.
Well, yes.
Okay,
And so you can do this, okay? If the whole earth became corrupt, all thoughts of men were corrupt and violent and all that, and you say, well, Nephilim were half human, so yeah, then they would have acted that way as well, and their fathers were fallen angels, so okay, yeah, they were most likely evil guys. I don't have a problem with that, as long as we admit that we're speculating.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so that's to me a big important point, is I'm going to differentiate, I'm going to build a really high wall between what I can tell you the Bible says for itself on the one hand, and my speculation on the other one. Is that valid speculation? Yeah, I think it is. But as long as we admit we're speculating, no problem.
Now, I think, Ben, you may have had a question.
Yeah, I was just. It does seem unusual that for something like that there would only be a few verses in the Bible, like only a couple sentences in reference to them.
Yeah.
What do you think is the reason for that?
I think there's 2 main issues. One is, the more I read the Bible, the less I think about it as a theological text, and the more I think about it as an anthropological text. Because the real purpose of the Bible is to tell us about ourselves, where we came from, where we're going, what's happening in the meantime. And so no matter what the Bible talks about, it always brings it back to humanity, our fallen nature, the redemption, and our relationship with God. It always comes back to that. So for example, if you look at Genesis 6, first 4 mere verses, that's it, are about this situation with the Nephilim. And then what? Then the focus is directly on humanity and what's going on with us. And it's the same way with anything. You try to get into the Bible about any other topic, angels, demons, you name it. you'll get a little bit, and then always going back to, okay, now how does that pertain to us? And so that's part of the reason why. And the other reason is exactly what we already talked about. They existed pre-flood. You're the last of them drowned in the flood, and the story. There's literally nothing else to be said about it.
So what post-flood reference to the Nephilim is there in the Bible then?
Okay, so now that's the important part. Is I like your qualifier. You said reference, right? Because to me,
Right.
there's a tremendous difference between whether the Bible is describing them as really existing at the time that they're being put on record, or whether they're just being referred to.
Right.
See what I mean? Okay.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so the second reference is post-flood, and the second reference is the mother of all Nephilim texts. You know, all two of them. What happens is people use the second one to then go back in history and reinterpret or misinterpret the first one. Okay, so let me get into the second one. You have Moses sending land that would become Israel, and there's 12 of them. When they come back, they first say good things about the land, then they show the people some of the fruit they brought back with them. Then they start describing that the people of the land are strong. Then they talk about how they have big, well-fortified cities. And then they describe the peoples, plural, of the land, and they name them. The Anakim, for instance, they name a few of the different tribes, right? And they're saying we're not going to be able to go up against them. So like at this point, historical context and cultural context here, these are wilderness itinerant travelers who live in tents. And now they're coming into the land they're supposed to conquer, and they're seeing cities that are well fortified. This is definitely intimidating for them. Right? And they're seeing that there's a lot of people in the land, and they're obviously just intimidated. So 10 of the spies are starting to say, no, we're not going to be able to do, well, do what? Well, they're not going to be able to do what God commanded them to do. So then what happens is Caleb chimes in, and he starts encouraging the people. Yes, we surely will be able to do this, right? Now, something interesting happens at this point in the narrative. The narrator tells us specifically that then they brought a quote-unquote evil report. Okay? And then they're quoted again as talking about how all the inhabitants of the land are of great stature, and how they saw the Nephilim, and how the Nephilim are related to the Anakim, and that the Nephilim are very, 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 very tall. Okay, so if you got the drift, especially you, Zach, who is an author, I mean, you get the drift of the narrative, right? They, first of all, the report really read backwards than it would if it was true, because they show up, they're like, hey, the land is good, here's some fruit, here's the people, here's the cities. Oh, and by the way, the last thing, we saw these absolutely ginormous guys that were half human, half angel. If you really saw that, in my mind, that'd be the first thing you would do. You would run into camp saying, you won't believe what we just saw, right? And then maybe eventually the last thing you talk about is the land and the fruit. I mean, who cares about that at that point?
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't they get rebuked after saying that,
They
though?
absolutely. So, but well, yes. So maybe I'm just being subjective. Okay, maybe they told the story the way they told it, and I'm just being pushy. But yes, they are. First of all, we're told that they present an evil report. Within the evil report, they contradict the first report, which is taken as is. First report, they speak well of the land. Evil report, they speak ill of the land. First report, they say all the people in the land are strong. All of a sudden, in the evil report, guess what? Oh, they're all of great stature, right? First report, they name a bunch of the tribes they saw, including the Anakim. Evil report, all of a sudden, oh, by the way, gosh, I guess we forgot to mention this. We saw Nephilim there as well. And oh, by the way, Anakim are related to them. And oh, by the way, they're super tall. So the whole thing just stinks, right? Like in your personal life, would you believe people who talk like that, who contradict themselves, who basically, when they're backed into a corner, make up a don't go in the woods type of tall tale, a scare tactic, right?
Yeah.
And so they are rebuked for it. Moreover, there are times in the Bible where Moses, Caleb, Joshua, and God himself discuss that, yes, the Anakim were in the land, but none of them say one single word about Nephilim. Never. And you have many descriptions of the various peoples of the land, the various peoples around the land. You have descriptions of battles. You even have descriptions of combat. And you have description of the end times. Nephilim are never mentioned once. Period. Full stop.
Yeah, they always take that as it, what was it? As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be. But then, you know, it's basically cleared up that they're just talking about how the flood was like a sudden thing, and that the end times would be a sudden thing. So I don't get.
You're absolutely right, because so let's just tie a bow on this thing. So you can't say something like, "Well, the Bible says they were there in post-flood," and by the way, that's Numbers chapter 13. You can't say that. And you also can't say, well, Moses wrote it. And you can't say, well, God inspired it to be written. Because you need to look at who said it, why did they say it, and what was the reaction to what they said. So what was God inspired that Moses wrote and isn't the Bible is the statement made by unfaithful, disloyal spies who end up being rebuked for what they said, and they contradict Moses, Joshua, Caleb, and God. So what happens is, for some reason, we're going to believe these spies, and then we're going to take what they said, and we're going to read it back into Genesis 6, so that now we have to literally invent a way that Nephilim either survived or they came back. Out of whole cloth. It just doesn't exist in the Bible, so these guys have to invent it.
Yeah, that's L.A. Marzulli's pretty much entire shtick by taking the gigantic leap and saying that since these fallen angels and Satan cannot reproduce, that they have to genetically splice themselves into alien human hybrids. Like that, how you can get to that point, I don't get it. Like, it's just crazy.
Well, but remember, so we're starting with believing the rebuke spies, and then we're applying the Steve Quayle hermeneutic that into your interpretive lens. So you can no longer stop yourself if you're on that track, because now you're rereading the whole Bible in a way that you're seeing stuff that literally isn't there. Okay, so for instance, I should mention this. I'm not just an armchair researcher who reads stuff and then writes about it. I have actually interacted with people who believe in that stuff for years and years and years. I get into all kinds of discussions with people who are fans of Marzulli and Skiba and Horn and all those guys. And so I have experience on the ground. See what I mean? And so what they'll tell me is stuff like, and I'll admit this is low-hanging fruit level, but I hear it all the time. Well, you're saying that there's no post-flood Nephilim. Giants are all over the Old Testament, post-flood. Okay, now if you're paying attention, I hope you realize that's called moving the goalpost. Because if I'm referring specifically to the Hebrew term Nephilim that has a very specific definition, and they're referring to a vague, generic, subjective, and undefined English word, giant. So right there, I force them to put the brakes on, and I'm like, wait a minute, did you notice what happened? You're talking about something different than I am.
Right.
And that gets us into another discussion.
So is the word and I might be pronouncing this wrong, right? It's a Rephaim? Is that the same as Nephilim, or is that a different type of giant?
Okay, you hit upon such an important point, man. I'm telling you, that is a key issue to talk about. And I'd say no, they are not a different kind of giant because we have not yet defined the word giant. So I really can't know what we're talking about yet.
Yeah, right. Because giant can mean two different things, right? So
It can
okay.
mean, yeah,
Right.
exactly. See, that's you guys, you're hitting all the nails on the head. You're bringing up like the most important points to discuss. So biblically, giant can mean two or three things. And let me go to the other definition. So it can also be used metaphorically and just in common parlance, even in modern day North America, like he's a giant of industry, right? That's
Right.
total metaphoric. See, it's subjective too. So I am only 6 foot even, okay? Do you know how many times in my life I've been called a giant? Tons of time, all the time. So some people mean a few inches taller than average. Some people mean some feet taller than average. Some people mean entire body lengths taller than average.
Right.
And that's another subjective thing, is what is average? Because the ancient Israelites and the ancient Egyptians, basically the people of the ancient Near East, tended to average, this is males, by the way, because females are generally shorter. Males average 5 feet even to 5'3", right around there. So you could see even a 6.5 foot tall, much less a 7 foot tall guy would most certainly be described as giant by one or other.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna, maybe this is a stupid question, but I think one of the most famous stories from the Bible is David and Goliath, and Goliath is described as a giant, of course. Would you say that he was just like a very large person, or do you believe he was something else?
Okay, so let's work our way there. First of all, there is no Hebrew word for what we would very generally refer to as giant. The Bible tells us of people who are tall, which is subjective, and people who are very tall, which is subjective, and people of great stature, which is really just another way of saying very tall, which is subjective. And remember, the only reliable reference to Nephilim in the Bible is Genesis 6, and it offers no physical description, so we don't know if they were even 1 inch taller than average.
Right.
So there goes that right there. That's gone. So now, the problem is that much later in history, for some odd reason, the Greek translators of the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Septuagint, also known as LXX for 70, they use the term gigantes to translate more than one Hebrew word, and that drives me insane. When people use one word to describe more than one word, you're just asking for trouble. So they translate Nephilim and Rephaim and Gibborim as gigantes. And that just makes a tremendous mess, and what ends up happening is much later, English translators then just start translating Nephilim, Gibborim, and Rephaim, all of them as giant. And that is part of what's caused this gigantic problem. Haha.
Right. Yeah.
So yes, so back to the issue of Nephilim, and well, let's start with Gibborim, because a lot of these pop researchers speak of the Gibborim as if they are a people group, and they are not. The Gibborim is merely a descriptive term that means might or mighty. That's it. If you want to play the game that there's some kind of people group, well, guess what? Some of David's soldiers are referred to as Gibborim. Why? Because they were mighty soldiers. Well, guess what? Some angels are described as Gibborim. Why? Because they're mighty. Well, guess what? God himself is described as a Gibor. Well, why? Because God is mighty. It's merely a descriptive term. So in Genesis 6, when it refers to the Nephilim, yeah, it tells us that they are Giborim. They are mighty. Yeah, exactly. Just like tons of other people in the Bible. So that's a non-issue. The only reason it gets sucked up into this whole thing is because, again, the Greeks decided to translate it gigantes, and English translators decided to translate that as giants. In fact, I don't even want to say that's a translation. That's really a rendering. And so what happens then is these top researchers will read about how Nimrod began to be a what? Well, in the Hebrew, he began to be a Giborim on the earth. And then he became a ruler. Now, the way they're misreading that, according to the Steve Quayle Rosetta Stone, is, oh, look at that. Nimrod became a Nephil. Well, there's no indication of that whatsoever, period. But in their minds, that's what it must mean. So then, you have Nephilim rendered as gigantes and giants, and then you have Rephaim rendered as gigantes and giants. But you need to forget that. Just look at the Hebrew behind the words. What you'll find is Nephilim existed pre-flood strictly. Rephaim existed post-flood strictly. And Rephaim are just good old-fashioned human beings. So the way it works is Rephaim is like a main category under which there are subcategories like Anakim, and then there's subcategories under Anakim, there's Philistines. That's how we're going to work our way toward Goliath, okay? So it's kind of like we might say nation, tribe, clan, family, right? Those kind of categorizations. So Rephaim is just a main category of people, but there's no indication that they were anything but human. The only reason to think that they were anything more is because people are reading the English Bible and seeing Rephaim as giants. So, well, therefore, for some reason, we are saying that in order to be a quote-unquote giant, you have to be some kind of paranormal or half paranormal entity or being, but there's no indication.
It boggles my mind because that is so freaking crazy and out there and very easily debunked. I mean, I'm no freaking Bible scholar, but it's like, reading the Bible, it just on a lay level, it seems like you can obviously tell that they're, adding all this stuff into it. I don't get why they continue to surge in popularity because it seems like
because they're cool.
It's interesting.
Right, but I mean, giant is a lot cooler than just some Canaanite, like
just a guy who was like really fucking intimidating, apparently.
Right.
So, what are your opinions on some of these authors, other than the obvious screwing up of the Genesis thing? Like, for instance, Jim Wilhelmsen, who you might want to check out our show we did with him. That was pretty good. What's your assessment of his work? Because I like him, but sometimes he goes a little out there, and he'll wind up in places saying that the Antichrist is going to have a Star Trek symbol on him, or something like he spins these like marvelous yarns, but I just something about him I can't wrap my mind around because okay, just go into it. What?
Okay, if you don't mind, I needed to tie a bow on the issue of Goliath, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah, please do, because I know that Ben wanted to answer that. Yeah.
So obviously, we know he was not Nephil, period. We already know that because they didn't make it past the flood, so that he cannot have been a Nephil. And well, what are we told about him? Well, he's a Philistine. Philistine is a subgroup of Anakim. Anakim are a subgroup of Rephaim. So there you go. But what about his height? Well, the first description we get of him is he's impressive because he's a champion. He's a champion soldier. He's well trained, and he's an intimidating guy. He's a successful warrior. That's the main thing to think about him. And then we do get a description of him. Here's the problem. You have a discrepancy regarding his height between Greek and Hebrew manuscripts. Okay, so the Greek manuscripts have him as being just shy of 10 feet. Now, the Hebrew manuscripts, plus the Dead Scrolls, plus the historian Flavius Josephus, have him being just shy of 7 feet. Okay, now the thing I'd like to say after that is his height is a non-issue because height doesn't have anything to do with Nephilim, and if his height is mentioned at all, it's probably because when you compare it to the Israelites, who again were 5'3", even a 6.5 foot tall guy is pretty tall compared to them, especially when he's a trained, experienced, and successful warrior. So you see, you can't just remove, you can't just pretend what's important about Goliath is his height, but you have to think about it in terms of historical and cultural context. That's why I like to mention all those things about him. And incidentally, the majority of the evidence obviously is on the side that he was just shy of 7 feet. The issue about the Greek manuscripts is that they were being rendered, translated in Alexandria, Egypt, and the Egyptian cubit was longer than the Hebrew one. So it makes me think when they were translating the cubit sizes, they were just automatically converting the Egyptian cubit. They weren't, in other words, they weren't doing the calculations to make sure that the Hebrew cubit was accurately represented. They were just using their own measurements, if that makes sense. That's just, I can't prove that. It's just a sense that I get.
Right, that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So there's the Goliath thing. And I already mentioned the Nimrod thing. And let me just quickly throw in the King Og of Bashan thing, because he's another one of their heavy hitters. You always hear that King Og of Bashan was 12 to 13 feet tall. Well, why is that? Well, because his bed is about 12 feet long. Okay, so what?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to say, I personally think that he was 12 to 13 feet long because I figure that based on his bed, he was probably that big. Again, you can say that, but just make sure you admit that you're speculating.
Yeah, he could be 5 foot, right?
Yeah, it seems more likely he had all that room for women.
You know what?
Right.
You might laugh, but that's one thing I mentioned in the book. This
right. I mean,
that's
more likely, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Look, this isn't like me at home, just a nobody. This guy was a king, so he most likely had a harem. Okay, and now if you were to measure my bed, yeah, you'd get a pretty good idea how tall I am. But guess what? You'd also think that I was about 5 times wider than I am.
Right, exactly.
But now, just we can be done with Og in just a second. The thing is, we know that certain cults of the day had what they call ritual beds. They were not beds that were slept on. They were oversized beds made of material like stone, or in Og's case, iron, and they were meant to represent the place where the female deity has sex with the male deity. So it's very likely this was not a bed that he slept on. It was purely a ritualistic object. So anyhow, there's that. Okay, now on to these guys personally. I can't say I know a lot of them personally. I did interact with Rob Skiba a bit because he came up with a sci-fi story called Seed, and he was kind enough to send me the manuscript or the script for the story, and I wrote a positive review of it because it is a good sci-fi story and I liked it. So that to me, that's a different story than his theology. And so I don't know, for some reason he hasn't responded to me anymore since then. Eli Marzulli, I interacted with just a little bit because I watched one of his lectures and I thought he made a pretty bad error. So I wrote an article about it called An Open Note to L.A. Marzulli, and he ended up writing me and saying, basically that, okay, that was my lecture, but if you look at my book, I actually didn't make the blunder in the book, and he was kind enough to send me his book just so I could verify that. So that was nice. Jim Wilhelmsen is the guy that I probably interacted with the most. So he sent me his book, Beyond Science Fiction, and I posted a positive review of it for what it was. And then sometime later, we hooked up on LinkedIn and we've chatted a little bit. So for me, this is not like a battle of the wills, right? It's not me against these guys on a personal level, not at all. I'm just saying, this is what they claim. These are the words they use to claim them. I'm going to quote them 1,000 times in this book. And these are the issues with what they're saying. So yeah, with Jim, I'm not exactly sure how he ends up in the peculiar places that he ends up with his conclusions, but inevitably it traces back to a fundamental level of the misunderstanding of the issue of Nephilim. It always does.
Yeah, because he's an awesome person, but when I read Beyond Science Fiction, that was kind of my takeaway, that he's taking all these kind of popular conspiracy theories and trying to apply them to the Bible beforehand, rather than letting the, what he's writing about rise up directly from the Bible.
And see, but this is what I was mentioning at the beginning, and I think you're right, is they end up co-opting other fields of research into their nephilology. That's exactly right. So now, what I found, if you remember in that book, he's got a whole chapter of the Bible that he quote unquote translated himself. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like you said, he's a wonderful man. I think he's a nice guy. I always enjoy at least listening to him. But there's some aspects that it's like, oh boy, or brother, you really did something here that I can't believe you did. Because what he's doing is looking up each word in the chapter. He's looking up the definition and he's picking from, any 2 or 5 definitions. I'm going to go with this one. And then this doesn't work. I'm going to look at the root word of this word and look at the 4th definition down. And I'm going to say that's the actual definition. And I'm going to rewrite the chapter according to that. And he does that for a whole chapter. It was pretty to see, honestly.
This is Rob.
That actually scares me, what Jeremy brought up there. Yeah. I've always taken that to mean like literal translation, not translations, but like literally like having the manuscript and like taking something out, therefore keeping something from the Bible, not necessarily speculation.
That's what I'm talking about too. But you said he rewrote parts of the Bible. This Rob Skiba character, right? I mean, it says not to do that here. So.
Well, what I'm saying is that he took a chapter and he claims to have retranslated it. But so what I'm saying is that his modus operandi is to look up the definition of the words, or sometimes the etymology, meaning the root of the words, and then arbitrarily picking, because every word can have 3, 5 definitions, right? Mm-hmm. So you're just kind of picking and choosing the one that sounds best to his desired end. So it's like a pragmatic thing where I'm going to retranslate this according to what I wanted to say in the end, type of thing.
Yeah, I just couldn't ever see myself writing about the Bible for that verse right there, because it seems like it's just such a slippery slope where, like you said, you mess up on one thing, which is the Nephilim, and it's not mentioned that much in the Bible, and you're in freaking la land really quickly. And it'd be scary if I had written like a whole catalog of stuff about that and then, looked at that verse. But I've always taken that verse to mean like, I guess like original manuscript. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
So Ken, we've spent a good deal of time on the Nephilim, but I guess I wanted to ask, what do you see as your calling, your purpose for writing all these things? What is your end goal? Is it to win the hearts and minds of everyone to Jesus, or I mean, what is your chiefest concern in all this publishing and translating?
Yeah, and actually, if we could talk about authorship a little bit, that'd be nice too. But one of my reasons is basically so my head doesn't explode.
The prophet, was it Isaiah, who had to speak because the Lord burned his mind with the knowledge. He burned with the knowledge if he didn't express it. Is it that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, in a way, because when I started writing, it was really just because I was trying to understand things. And I found that one thing that was very therapeutic for me is, well, if I'm forced to put what I'm thinking into words, that starts to help me make sense of it in my own mind to the point where I can express it with words that somebody else could understand. And so that kind of makes it therapeutic and also makes it systematized. That when I'm forced to write this down so that somebody else can read it and understand it, it forces me to be careful about it and to make sure I'm not contradicting myself, and to make sure that, like I said, it's systematized. So my angelology has to fit my theology has to fit my nephilology, my anthropology, my eschatology. Everything has to fit together if I'm out to be consistent, right?
So do you have an academic background?
Yes, I somehow managed to graduate high school.
Some of these works of fiction that you've chosen to take on in books, Alien versus Predator and Stephen King's It. Why did you choose those specifically? They must have some significant symbolism that you felt needed to be addressed.
Well, see, one thing is when, by the way, I should probably note, I've been a horror fan for decades and decades and decades. And so one thing that always interests me is the premise, the worldview, the philosophy, the backstory, what's behind the story, right? I remember once I was watching a horrendously cheesy Godzilla movie, and my wife came in the room and she says, "Aren't you embarrassed watching something like that?" Like, I don't care to watch a giant monster stomping on a city. It's the story behind it that interests me.
Mm-hmm.
It's how are they weaving together a tale about how this creature came to be and why it's doing what it's doing, what the motivations are, how it's interacting with other monsters. And that's what interests me. So then when I watch movies, it's like I have two brains, right? One of them's just watching the show. I'm just enjoying the story. I suspend disbelief. I don't really care. If they tell me that a steam-powered rocket can get me to outer space, I don't care. It's a story. It's a movie. It's no big deal. But part of me is just constantly vigilant, constantly thinking, what am I seeing? What's the message behind it? What are they trying to get me to believe? How are they putting this across? And so when it came to Stephen King's It, and then the Alien and the Predator franchises, which did end up doing crossovers, and also the other book that you see down there, Transhuman Hollywood, I probably touched upon 30 movies or so that have transhumanist themes. And that's always what fascinates me, is to dig up what is behind what I'm seeing on the screen. How did it get on the screen, and what is it meant to convey? What is it really saying?
Yeah, see, that's the thing with me too, because it might just come from being a fiction writer, because I know personally that to finish a story, there's got to be some kind of kick to it. You're not just writing blindly in the wind. Like, there's a logical thematic current to it. And when you're watching stuff, you pick up on that really quick. And I believe there are cases you can make that some authors may have bad intentions with what they come up with. And especially the same goes for when you get into like blatant, like satanic symbolism in the movies going along with it. So maybe that's why I pick up on this stuff. And Jeremy seems to kind of be wary of that. He thinks that we're going a little overboard. And I think he's right sometimes.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with you. So okay, let me.
I think there's two different things, but go on. I think you're going to answer. You're going to say the same thing I
Yeah.
was going to say. Ken, go ahead.
So to me, there's a few levels to this. One is the people who will tell me, "Oh, come on, it's just a movie." It's
Jeremy.
nothing." Okay. Well, but do you ever listen to directors and script writers and people involved, actors? Do you ever listen to them? Because they're very open about how, well, this has to do with my real life worldview. Something about it. In fact, I was just watching a short interview with Morgan Freeman talking about Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. And he isn't just talking about, hey, this is a science fiction book. No, he's saying it makes us think about, are there other beings out there? What would it be like to meet them? And you're getting the sense that this isn't just talking about fiction. This is fiction as a vehicle to talk about real life worldviews. So now, let me give you the Stephen King It as a good example, because I've never been much into Stephen King, so this story was really unknown to me. But when I latched onto it, then I went through the novel, I went through the TV miniseries, I went through the 2 movies. And now there's part where I'm just saying, hey, here's me and watching this and reading this, and here's what I personally think, and it's subjective, and hey, it's just my opinion. But then there's another part where I looked up interviews with the actors and the script writers and Stephen King, and I started learning what are they saying about the movie. And I found along the way, a lot of what I just figured out on my own, I found confirmation from their own mouths. So there's those levels. You see what I mean? There's me just saying, hey, here's my opinion. And then there's me saying, but look at what they are saying about it themselves. They are telling you that there's more to it than just some kind of fun or creepy story. There's aspects of it where it touches upon something to do with their real life beliefs.
Yeah,
Right. And I think that, Zach, what Jeremy says, right, he doesn't care if, say, somebody is, I don't know, the director of Rosemary's Baby is intentionally trying to turn you into a lover of Satan through symbolism. He doesn't care if that is true, right? He thinks it's a good movie regardless, right? I mean, I think that's what Jeremy has said in the past. He doesn't necessarily say that I don't believe that, Roman Polanski was doing these things, right? He says, even if he is, I don't care. It's still a good movie.
I can divorce my I can divorce the intentions of the artist from the art and view it as an objective thing that exists in the world, and so
but
like
it's not though. It's a work of art.
Yeah, and that's enough for me. I don't need them to their occult symbolism to concern me or influence me. I just look at the finished product, and that's enough. I mean, story is one of the most important things in my life. So I'm going to look at all kinds of stories.
Yeah, that's pretty. Sorry, that's pretty much. That goes along the lines with what I was saying. I can watch it and enjoy it for what it is, and that's it. But then there's the other part of me who's interested in the other part. But let me just point out one thing. Every story tells a tale, right? Every story tells a tale. And so whether we care about it or not, whether we're interested in looking into it or not, it is a fact that every story tells a tale. So that, for instance, if I'm going to write a fictional tale, and I've written extremely short stories, just a few of them, I'm going to, by necessity, write something of my own worldview into it. Because if not, it would be something that was just so completely abstract that it'd be unreadable. Okay, now let me make the opposite, the point on the opposite end. But what if I purpose to write a story that has no worldview, no philosophy, no ethics, nothing? Then guess what? It still has a meaning because I purposefully set out to do that. So there's no way to get away from the fact that a writer, an author, a script writer, a producer, a director, they cannot get away from the fact that things are being done on purpose. And that's why somebody's willing to put in millions and millions of dollars to make a movie, because somewhere behind it, there's a purpose, even if it's just to make a bunch of money. They're putting.
Well,
forth
yeah,
a
I mean, I
story.
agree with that, but I think there's like a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum as far as fiction writing, I think, right? Whereas one end of the spectrum is like a shamanism type of situation, on the opposite end is propaganda, right? So I think that, you know, even if you are winging it, right, and you're having some sort of you're just totally in the flow, not thinking about any kind of themes or any kind of overall message or anything like that. You're just in the flow. You're just concentrating on the story in and of itself. You know, and I would think that would be more of the shaman-esque side of it. You're still, all of your life, you know, experiences and your worldview is going to seep into that, right? Whereas in the propaganda end of it is, it's like, I want to tell a story from the onset with a particular agenda in mind, right? So, I mean, either way, you can't avoid. And I think that I'm just really restating what you're saying, Ken,
Yes.
is that either way, you're going to come up with a meaning in there that's going to seep into it. Either it's going to seep in, or it's going to be intentional, right?
Right.
Where,
So it's going to,
you know,
so it's
yeah.
going to be.
It's a big misconception that we're saying don't become a denizen of the arts because of this. All we're doing is getting into the art and then digging it apart and exposing.
Right. It's a deeper level of it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Another level. So I would say that a story is either purposefully meaningful or it is nihilistic. But then if it's nihilistic, then that is the meaning. That is the purpose.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
you can't get away from it. Now, let me just, since I'm not on YouTube, I wanted to respond. Somebody had asked if I'm saying that Stephen King and Morgan Freeman are Nephilim wranglers. No, I wasn't saying that at all. The reason I mentioned Freeman is because he spoke of a fictional novel in terms of real life curiosities that he has. And the issue with Stephen King was just about what the worldview behind his novel It was, which is
Right.
definitely Gnostic at the very least.
Now, as far as Phoenix asking about if art is manipulative, you see, I believe it can be. It's just all about that worldview. Anytime an artist writes a piece, the worldview, as we've already established, will, you know, seep into it. So whether that manipulates someone or not, I don't think you can say. I believe you can write something, like as Gregor was saying, with the point of it being propaganda, but that's like an intentional act. So it can be manipulative, but it's always going to have the possibility of being manipulative.
So the old question, the old classic question is, does art imitate life or does life imitate art? And that's really a classic false dichotomy, because it's both. There's a place where they meet. So now,
Right.
is art manipulative? Well, but we don't need to look at the concept of manipulation as being strictly negative. I mean, I
Right.
have kids and I manipulate them into doing the right thing all the time until they start learning how to do it by themselves, right? So is it art manipulative? I think that's the whole purpose of art, is to be manipulative. Now, whether you take that in a positive or a negative direction, that's another level of the story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, is it manipulative or is it transformative or is it both? Right. And you know, and you might say that the manipulation is what you need is a tool to get to the transformative piece. Right. So, I mean, yeah, like you said, manipulative has a negative connotation, but I don't think it's necessarily wholly negative, especially when you're talking about art. I mean, I think the art's supposed to manipulate you to a certain degree, right? To make you feel something or make you think something. Right.
I think so, yeah. I don't have a problem with being manipulated for art, but as far as occult symbolism, I don't take it seriously enough, you know, like an Ankh, an Egyptian Ankh symbol or a pentagram or something. Those symbols don't like probe my inner recesses in a way that cause me to do negative things in my life, you know. So
that's a different topic, though, because none of us, I don't think we've really gotten into the symbolism aspect too much.
And I hope you're not being probed.
Yeah.
Right.
But the thing about the symbolism that I've never gotten, is it supposed to be like a subconscious thing, or just them saying like, "Hey, this is what we're doing"? Like I've never really understood that. Like, is it just like a branding?
What are you talking about specifically? Occult symbolism or symbolism in, or when you're talking about analyzing literature?
Not the analyzation part. Jeremy brought up the like literal, like actual symbols that you can see, which that's not what we were talking about. But we can talk about that. But it's like I don't really understand. I'm with him. I don't really understand what they do. Like, is it just branding or what?
Well, okay, so there's different levels of it, right?
Right.
So you have people who would put that kind of symbolism into their art. And art, okay, now it can mean anything, right? A painting, a movie, a novel, a music video, anything. There's people who would do that because they believe that it will have an effect upon you. And they are definitely trying to manipulate you, again, positively or negatively. They believe those symbols have power. And so that's why they do it. Where there's other people who, like, let's say we right here in this chat decide, hey, let's write a creepy occult story. Well, we're going to put those kind of symbolisms into the story on purpose, just because that's the genre, right?
Yeah.
And nowadays, look how easy it is. You can go in a search engine, type up occult symbolism, and just put any of them into any story you want. So again, it depends on the motivation of the author, why they're doing it, and whether there's a purpose of manipulation or just kind of playing the game of genre.
Right, and I'm sure that some people, right, believe that a particular symbol, right, actually has a an impact on the person, right, that reads the art or experiences the art in a way that they don't know it's subconscious, right? It impacts them on a subconscious level or on a spiritual level, right? They believe that. That's their intent. Now, whether or not there's any actual truth to that's the thing,
Oh, let me give you a great example, true real life example. If you can remember the cover of L. Ron Hubbard's book, Dianetics.
Right.
You guys know L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology.
Yeah, it's like the volcano, exploding volcano.
Yeah.
Now, why did you use the term exploding?
Or erupting.
Or erupting, I guess, but I don't know why. Yeah, I mean, I did use the word exploding. I'm not 100% sure why, but
that is a good point.
Okay, because that's really interesting, because it is not an erupting volcano. You're actually right. It's an exploding volcano. So why did he do that? Because if you guys are aware of the OT3 level of Scientology, it talks about the intergalactic warlord Xenu, and in order to deal with overpopulation, he packed up a bunch of these alien entities on a spacecraft, brought them to Earth, dropped them inside a volcano, and then dropped bombs on the volcano to cause it to explode.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So now so that's right. It's not erupting. It was made to explode. And so that becomes an essential part of Scientology, which is that
you see, it worked on Gregor. It worked on him.
Well, I did know about that particular mythos. That's probably why. Yeah.
So the claim is that when these aliens were killed, murdered by being exploded to death, by bombs being dropped in a volcano, their spirits were left to roam the earth in a disembodied manner, and then those become attached to human beings, and they're called your body thetans, and that's what Scientology is trying to get rid of. The point being, they did that on purpose, because what they wanted to do is, as you look at the cover of that book, and you also see the animation of that in their early commercials, it was supposed to trigger a subconscious memory. It was supposed to trigger a past life memory in your subconscious that would then get you to realize that, oh my goodness, I'm having this problem and Scientology can fix me. That was the whole point.
That actually reminds me, there's a Scientology book. It's a nonfiction book. I cannot remember what it's called, but the original cover for it is, I'm not kidding, you can look this up. It's a woman in a bear suit sitting on stage and eating a turkey leg.
I have that book.
And yeah, that's apparently that's. I tried to find what the meaning to this is because it makes no sense. And apparently, yeah, it's the same. It's the same idea. It's supposed to trigger past life memories.
Now, I have a Scientology book. The cover is a dropping bomb. That's all it is. And well, now you know why. Yeah, I mean that's what they're doing. Is they're using the symbols to supposedly trigger something within you. Or now you think about a different level. Okay, I love to use this example because it's very mundane, right? So most of us know that on the Carol Burnett show, when she did her, I don't know if she did it in the intro or conclusion of the show, she would tug on her ear, right?
Right.
And what was that?
I don't know. It was some kind of communication to a relative or something, saying that they,
I think it was her grandma, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was just to say, I love you, grandma.
Right.
Now think about it. Here's this person on national television tugging on her ear, something, if anybody even noticed it, they would just think, oh, she must have a itchy ear or she's got some kind of weird tick. But secretly, it was a symbol that only two people knew the meaning of it initially, and it's her and her grandma, and she's just saying, I love you. Now, you take a concept like that, that's very, like I said, mundane, and that's how you understand why somebody like me would say, hey, I can watch this movie and just enjoy it for what it is, but I'm also keeping an eye out for, well, what if the script writer or the producer or the actor or the director are trying to actually convey something behind the scenes as well? That's why there's some precedents for thinking that way. Now, again, whether you care or not, whether you bother with that or not, that's a whole other issue.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I mean, I think there are people that do include symbolism, right? That's, you know, what some would say satanic or, you know, or something, right? On purpose, you know, and it could be for any number of reasons, right? Like, you know, like, you know, they had a, was it some kind of recent concert for COVID-19 where they have like Lady Gaga in the advertisements, you know, like covering one eye, and she's got like upside down crosses on her outfit and stuff like that. You know, I mean, there's obviously something going on there. What exactly it is, I don't know, you know, but there's, you know, obviously, you know, it's not like they didn't know that there was upside down cross symbolism on this outfit, and that this one eye, covering this one eye thing is a you know, a hot thing to do. You know what I mean? At some point in time, maybe it did actually mean something, and now it possibly means just, hey, we're going to do it to screw with the peasants or something. I don't know, right? But you know, so it's hard to say. But I mean, there is definitely weird. There's a lot of these weird ceremonies, like at like Olympic Games or opening to the CERN tunnel or that tunnel in Sweden or whatever. There's obviously something going on there, right? With some occult symbolism. They're doing something, right? There's some sort of a ceremony or ritual going on with a lot of these things, you know. Is it predictive programming? I don't know, but you have written on predictive programming, Ken, right? Like, can you explain to folks what that actually is?
Sure. I mean,
freaking Jeremy.
Uh-oh. You know what the hip phrase is nowadays for that kind of stuff? Illuminati confirmed.
Illuminati confirmed.
You know, I have written about that before, and it was in my transhumanism book, and I also brought it up again in this latest book, because like I said, these guys who claim they're doing theology, they're also doing fiction. And so I talked about predictive programming, actually more in terms of the way that literary scholars refer to it, which is normative fiction. That's the term. Normative fiction. Okay, so the concept is that you seek to make something normalized,
Hmm.
right? You seek to popularize it and make it common and normal through fiction.
Right.
And so, for example, in my book called 50 Shades of Grey, Aliens,
Yeah, it's a good title, but yeah, go ahead.
I gave some examples about how some authors have admitted that, yeah, we were contacted by certain government agencies and they told us about how they want to give a boost to the space program. So we should start writing fiction that kind of pushes the agenda of having to leave the Earth. So then we're going to have to fund space travel and all that stuff. And so,
Right.
right, so that's a way of using fiction for the specific purpose of getting a concept to become commonplace.
Right.
Now everyone's talking about aliens, like it's a foregone conclusion, when in the 90s, all throughout the 90s, it was, a fringe thing that was relegated to like Friday nights on the Fox network, and Unsolved Mysteries. And now we've got the Pope and political leaders saying that UFOs and extraterrestrials are a fact.
Yeah, but some people would say that the 90s stuff, right? There was a huge pop culture, explosion about the Greys or whatever aliens in the 90s. Some people would say that that was just planting the seeds, right? So it's in the, it's in the public consciousness, but at first it seems like a bunch of craziness, and it's just planting the seeds for now, right? Where it's been in the public consciousness for so long that folks will be thinking, well, maybe there is something to it. And that's what you're saying, Ken, as far as a normative aspect of fiction, right? As far as an idea being normalized, I guess, throughout fiction. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Exactly.
Yeah, and then there's also the thing, and I always equate the swamp gas stuff with the modern day flat earthers. They're just something for people to poke at and say, oh, they're leading us on, or in the flat earther case, oh, they're freaking stupid. It's like a little thing thrown out there to make people feel like they're smart by taking on sort of like either a contrarian or unofficial narrative, when it's really reverse psychology, and that's what they're wanting to begin with.
Well, yeah, and it's also, I think that the flat earther thing is one of the things that it's used for most commonly is to couple with something that might actually have some validity to it, right? Like you know what I mean? Like they'll use it in the same sentence with, say, anti-vaxxers or something, right?
Yeah.
And the anti-vaxxer term is to get people to think that there's never been a problem ever with the vaccine that was ever administered to a human in the world. Anybody that would believe that is a anti-vaxxer that probably hangs out with flat earthers, right? Yeah. So that's my thinking about it, at least.
So is Pennywise? Would you say that he is based on a Native American trickster spirit? Is that what that whole thing was?
Yes. When you trace the history of clowns backwards, okay, that was really mumbling and stumbling on my part. When you trace the concept of clowns historically, it does seem to me to go back to a trickster type of spirit. And then Native Americans also had, for instance, in the Southwest, what they call the Pueblo clowns, right? And these would be not just people who wore crazy outfits, but they were contradictory people. Like if it was really hot, talk about how freezing cold they are, and they need to get next to a fire to get warm. Or if they just ate dinner, boy, I'm so hungry. They would just be contradictory, and that's part of the trickery and the abstract nature of their personality, which is to be unlike what they really are. And in essence, that's what a clown is when you, even a modern day clown, right? Part of the reason they're fun and creepy is that it's a front, it's put on, it's not, behind it all, there's a person who is pretending to be something that they're not, looking like something that they're not. And
Right.
that's what makes it entertaining and creepy. In this book, I was naughty enough to liken it to the drunk chick at the party, wearing too much makeup, uh, doing things she would never do in her sober state. But you recognize that, well, this is something unlike the real person.
What does the turtle in it represent? You've got a chapter on it here, and that's where I'm at. The turtle that helps the children to perform the ritual of chud or chewed, where basically he tells bad jokes and ties Pennywise's tongue in knots or something. What, I never understood it, but
Well, yeah, okay. So for one, in the movie, they just kind of mashed together in what are two different things in the novel. In the novel, there's one ritual that's the smoke, and there's the ritual of chud.
Right.
The movie just kind of mashes them together. So let's set that aside. I mean, we might as well go right to the source material and talk about the novel. So I guess spoiler alert for you who are reading that chapter right now.
Right. It's been that novel's been around for quite a while. So go ahead.
In fact, you know what? I found a typo all these years later. There's a part of the book that refers to the ritual of child, which is obviously a typo.
A Freudian slip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, definitely a Freudian prostitute. A Freudian slip.
Right.
don't you think it was weird that King's idea of them bonding to become stronger to battle him was for them to basically, for lack of a better term, basically to run a train on their only female friend? That's really weird to me.
Well, I got a better term. It's called sex magic.
Yeah.
Is that a thing? Is that a real thing, though?
Oh yeah, definitely.
That is not only a thing. That is the essential bottom line premise upon which many, many, many occult groups ground their concept of what they're doing in terms of a magical act.
Right.
Especially in black magic. I don't want to get into details, but there's men with men type of stuff, and sex magic goes way, way back. Even in the Bible, it talks about the pagan cultures that had temple prostitutes. That goes way, way, way back. And so in the novel, I'm going to get back to the turtle in a second, but in the novel, I admit I kind of skimmed that part because I just found it incredibly uncomfortable. But it is very obvious that she is talking about feeling their energy, their power coming into her and out of her into them. And it's very obviously a ritual. Whereas Stephen King, he just played that off. He said, well, look, that was, when I wrote that, people weren't so sensitive about that kind of stuff. And he just saw it as a transition from childhood to adulthood, which I think is pretty messed up, by the way, having multiple unmarried partners as your sort of transition into adulthood. What are you talking about?
I mean, it kind of makes sense in the sense that they were going through great trauma. So I suppose, in a sense, they were trying to wrangle that trauma into something they could handle.
And frankly, that's one thing I mentioned in the book, which is that's one thing Stephen King does a lot, and it works well, and people like it. He starts a tale about children suffering various kinds of trauma, which solidifies their relationship to other children. And then he talks about how they become adults and how they have to deal with the same trauma, working it out later. And I think that works very well. It builds a very solid friendship between the kids,
right.
Overcoming it first. It works well.
Right. And you develop empathy for the characters. You care about them, what happens, right?
Yeah, no question about it. So the turtle, let's see.
Because the turtle that carries the world on its back, isn't that like a Hindu thing?
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, he really tied together a lot of mythology. And I end up just saying it's mostly Gnostic, but it has a lot of elements in it. And actually, you know what? He says that there's parts of it he doesn't even remember writing because he was such an alcoholic and cocaine head at the time that he literally
Right.
just blanked out, Anyhow, um, the thing about Gnosticism is sometimes you hear the term Christian Gnosticism, which is a contradiction in terms, because if you take literally any major biblical doctrine and you turn it inside out, upside down, and backwards, that's Gnosticism. And so in Gnosticism, okay, let me just qualify it. There's different forms, different schools of Gnosticism, so they'll differ on this and that point. I'm just going to be basic. You have some kind of Deus absconditus, really, a hidden God, a God who created a spiritual realm, but he's just unknown, okay? And then there's lower level gods. Then one of those lower level gods ended up creating the material realm, which is our universe. Now, that was a big no-no, because in Gnosticism, only pure spirit, or rather only spirit is pure. So if you create matter, now you've created something that is ontologically evil, meaning evil in and of itself as is. And so this God is not only senile for having done that, but also arrogant enough to then claim to his creation, hey, I'm actually the only true God. I'm the only one. And this God places his created beings in a little garden where he can kind of keep them nice and ignorant, like, you know what I mean? Barefoot and pregnant. And then comes along the savior, who is who? Well, the serpent. And the serpent brings wisdom to those beings and basically enlightenment. This is where you have the concept of enlightenment. And
Right.
in Greek mythology, it ends up being a version of the Prometheus story, right? Who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. And he was punished for it. Well, the fire is an important technology, but also symbolic of enlightenment, right?
Right.
So anyhow, long story short, what King does, and this is something that is not touched upon in the miniseries nor in the two movies, that they did not want to go here, okay? There is something, the novel calls it a other or another. That's it. So this is the hidden God. It's just, you don't really know what it is. It's some creature or being that created a turtle and created a spider. Now, they're not literally a turtle and literally a spider. These are just the closest approximations that our mind can conceive of what these things are, okay? Now, one day the spider gets an upset stomach, it vomits, and that vomit is our universe. All right?
Yeah,
Now,
so the spider is like the demiurge.
Right.
well, they both are.
Yeah, they both. I guess they both would be in this particular.
Right. It's kind of like dualistic at this point because you
Right.
have the creator and then you have it creates two. And then the turtle vomits. The vomit is the universe. The spider just thinks the turtle is a big idiot. It doesn't want anything to do with it. And at one point, the turtle retrieved into its shell, and the spider thought it was dead. It doesn't care. And so the spider went into the turtle vomit universe and just kept looking around, and finally, guess what? He falls to earth, just like Jesus said, I saw Satan fall to earth as lightning. And then it found something that ends up being incredibly important in the concept of witchcraft and magic, which is that the whole tale of it is really a battle of the wills. Magic is all about will. The occult is all about the will. And what it found is that it liked preying upon human beings because we have something unique it had not found anywhere else, and that's imagination. So it found, now you got to forget that it is a clown or it is a spider because it is really amorphous in a manner of speaking.
Right.
Ultimately, it's described as sort of an amorphic mass of orange light. but also a light that is hairy. If you see, that's how difficult it is to conceive. How could hair have light?
Yeah,
Or like, how could light have hair? I'm
Like
sorry.
dead lights or something like that, isn't that what they're
Dead
referred
lights,
to?
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Dead
yeah.
lights.
Yeah.
And then it's described as a spider because some of its characteristics. Then it's referred to. What ends up happening is it figures out that it can figure out what you're scared of. It can manifest to you as the thing you're most scared of. And now that fear within you will produce certain chemicals in your body that will then marinate your meat. And then when it eats you, it gets really a rush out of consuming human flesh that has
Like
been
a
marinated
adrenochrome
in all
rush,
this
right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So you're getting into trauma here, like
Right.
real trauma. And so that's why in the novel, it'll manifest as the teenage werewolf and Dracula and any number of monsters. That's what King set out to do, is to write a super monster that would turn into all these other monsters. And it's doing that in order to frighten the victim and then consume it. And so it ends up really enjoying the character of the clown because it had met a man formed as a clown. His name was Robert Gray. And eventually it just preferred taking on the persona because it realized, wow, everybody likes clowns, but everybody's scared of clowns as well. So it really enjoyed that.
Right. It's a perfect camouflage, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And then I also played a little bit with the concept of, well, because it ends up saying, well, my name is Robert. How do you do? I'm Robert Gray. I'm Pennywise the dancing clown. And then so Gray made me think, well, why are they depicting, especially in the movies, why are they depicting it with this giant elongated head that's so alien-like? And well, Robert Gray, Gray alien. I don't know. That was just kind of a speculation of mine. And
I mean,
so that's
Gray's featuring his other works as well, Dreamcatchers or whatever. There's an actual Gray alien in that.
Dreamcatcher. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is Dreamcatchers the one with the shit weasels?
Yeah.
Yes.
That one was kind of dumb.
I've not read it or seen it, but I know about it. Yeah. So you're okay. So in the pantheon of gods and the It universe, right? So we've got the turtle and the spider. So what would be the urge in that? And if we were going to compare it to urge and demiurge?
Well, one of the here's where it gets completely abstract and difficult, is in Gnosticism. Okay, let me just iron something out here that I think is really important. Because if you were to ask your typical Christian, hey, is the flesh corrupt? Well, yeah, the flesh is corrupt. Is the world corrupt? Well, yeah, the world is corrupt.
Right.
Okay, but that's also what Gnostics are saying.
Right.
No. Then you ask a Christian, well, is spirit pure? Of course, spirit is pure. Well, that's what the Gnostics also say. Well, no. There's a key distinction, which is that in Gnosticism, like I already said, matter, so the flesh, the world, is ontologically corrupt, meaning in its very nature and essence, from the very get-go, it was corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not so in biblical theology. Biblical theology is that God created the natural, the material realm, the flesh, and the world good.
Right.
The problem is that it became corrupt, but that it can also be redeemed back into its good state. So that is an absolutely fundamental difference.
I see. Yeah.
Okay, so what happens in Gnosticism is the ultimate redemption isn't having your sins forgiven by the sacrifice of Jesus. The ultimate redemption is just dying. So dying is good because it releases you from the material realm and sends you back into the spirit realm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now what's interesting too is, and Zach must have read this already because it was in the beginning of the book. I quoted the director Richard Stanley, who most recently directed Color Out of Space.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very explicit about how Hollywood is just retelling and retelling a Gnostic tale. And that's why it's so much about deconstruction and destruction, because that's the point. Salvation in Gnosticism is destruction and deconstruction, because you're deconstructing the material realm back into spirit. So
Right.
this is where it gets super weird. And I'm not saying that Stephen King got anywhere close to saying this. I'm just saying that it's the logical conclusion.
Mhm.
Really, it is the good guy because it is the one running around killing, murdering a bunch of people and consuming them. And what ends up happening is, well, he's really releasing them on a Gnostic interpretation. He's releasing them into spirit. So then that's
Yeah,
good.
that falls apart really quickly because it's like they're trying to justify evil by like
Yeah, I
removing.
mean, it's like a very fancy way of justifying your death cult. Yeah.
But see, the problem is when you're dealing in strict dualism in terms of that there's a spider and a turtle, and if you want to call one good and then one bad, you instantly realize, or should realize, you can't do that, because the one calls themselves good and the other bad, the other calls themselves good and the other bad. They
Right.
both disagree. It's exactly the same as in Star Wars, right? You have the Sith, you have the Jedi. The Sith claim that they are good and the Jedi are bad. The Jedi claim they're good and the Sith are bad. And ultimately, none of them can be absolutely good or absolutely evil, because
I don't know. The Sith
Force.
don't claim
Well-
they're good.
Well,
Well,
the
hold on now.
Sith. Well, the Sith claim they're on the dark side, which I guess doesn't necessarily mean evil to them.
But they claim that the Jedi are selfish and they're doing things out of wrong motivations, but the Sith are the ones who are doing it out of right motivations. And in other words, it is not truly a battle of good and evil, and it can't be, because guess what? The Force is an impersonal energy, and
Right.
it cannot take sides. It cannot have any absolutes about it. And so that's why anybody can tap into the Force and use it for any purpose that they want. And saying it's good or evil, it's just arbitrary. It's just whoever wins says that.
And this is, of course, putting aside the midichlorians bullshit.
Which I don't know. That to me kind of spoke of the issue of bloodlines, but another topic.
Yeah, it does.
But so back to
Yeah.
it. So then you have a turtle and a spider, and they're both running around doing whatever they're doing. And so it kind of becomes a Gnostic dualism thing. But then again, this is a fictional story. So it's not like Stephen King was trying to be theologically consistent, because,
Right.
for instance, the turtle says, "Oh, I'm not going to get involved with you," obviously, because to the turtle, it's like, well, let me put it this way: if you vomit right now, would you be terribly interested about the bacteria in your vomit?
Right. Right.
So it's not interested. It's like, what do I care? I don't get involved in this stuff. And but it does end up kind of giving them hints like, okay, you should perform the ritual of should. And so it does kind of end up getting involved somewhat. And in the end, the other or another, like the ultimate creator, does end up telling one of the kids, "Well done, my son." So you can see that they were kind of interested in what was going on.
Right.
So now let me just touch upon the ritual of Chud for a sec. And someone asked about it. So yeah, it is described as that you would come face to face with this entity, and then your tongues would be nailed together, and then there would be, you would have to tell jokes to each other and whoever. This whole mess of a story, but it ends up being made clear that that's just metaphorical. It's not like your tongues are literally going to be nailed together. The point of it being that it's a battle of the wills. It's going to be your will against the entity's will, and who comes out on top is going to be who can exercise their will the best. And this is what magic is all about. And it recognizes this. It recognizes that it is afraid of these kids because they're different than anybody he's dealt with before, which is because they have undergone childhood trauma and really come together that set their minds towards battling it, and that's what really put their fear into it. Is it recognizes it that they can put their wills together towards that end of battling it, and it even makes so. For example, I kind of keep my eye out for symbolism in terms of numerology.
Right.
And so this book is full of it, 7s and 27s especially. But again, so that was just me speculating. And then I was glad to find some confirmation on Stephen King's official website when it talks about his book about the baseball player, Blockade Billy.
Mm-hmm.
It states right there on his website that the number on his jersey is 13, and that the number 13 has a symbolic meaning. Well, in it, Stephen King puts into the mouth of it that it's thinking in terms of, okay, 2 of the kids are dead now. There's only 5, and that 7 is a more meaningful. I forget the wordage, but it makes it clear that it's thinking in terms of numerology correlated to sort of occult energy. That 7 would have been a more powerful number.
Right.
Now there's only 5, and 5 is still kind of a danger to him, but it's not as powerful as 7. So it's in there. It's not something I made up. It's in there.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean,
it all definitely ties together. I mean, I've never read the book. I've only seen the miniseries. So, but
yeah, I don't know how much
excuse me, how it was like so scared of the kids because but that honestly does kind of solve that. So that's for sure like a concrete thing in there, the will thing, or is that almost
absolutely
okay? Yeah,
absolutely. And you know what ends up happening in the story. So let me just dig a little rabbit hole, if I may. I wrote a chapter called the MK interpretation of it. It just as pure speculation. I was interpreting the story of it through the lens of the MK Ultra mind control experiments. If you guys are aware of that.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I don't have to say that's conspiracy theory because the CIA admitted it. So that's well known. Okay. And I thought, well, okay. Stephen King sets the story of it beginning in the 50s when MK Ultra was first starting, and then he ends it in the 80s when allegedly they stopped it. And so what if the story is really about a town where there's government, there's military experiment, or rather a presence, and so the government with the military have been conducting MK Ultra experiments, which are about what? They are about trauma, and they're about amnesia.
Yeah, trauma-based mind control and amnesia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens in the story, even if you want to throw out the MK Ultra aspect, what happens in the story is these kids undergo the trauma of living in a town where routinely, every 27 years or so, a bunch of kids, mostly kids, not always all kids, but mostly kids, they're murdered, they go missing, they're found, partly eaten if they're found at all.
Right,
and
there's and there's the trauma that they face in their own family lives, like Beth is being molested by her family. The black kid, I can't remember his name, but he faces racism, and they're all like very brutally bullied. And it's all kind of implied that it is like somewhat responsible for making the people more evil than they otherwise would be.
Yeah. There's definitely an aspect of possession, because when Beth's father is being particularly abusive to her, she's telling him, you let him in. Basically, you let it into you. This isn't you, Dad. You let it into you. There's an aspect of that. So what ends up happening is the kids undergo this trauma, and then the story goes to them as adults, where they all suffer amnesia. They literally don't remember anything about their childhood. They move away from Derry, and that's it. Now Mike stayed behind. And so he has his memories of what happened. All of them move away, and they all become successful in life, by the way.
Right.
So then,
for the most part, Beth still falls into the abusive relationship, but for the most part, they're pretty successful.
No, Okay, you're right. That's an important qualifier. They become, financially successful. Let's put it that way. Even if their personal
Right, like in
lives
the
aren't.
material world, they become
Right.
successful, and yeah.
And the point is that there's a reason for that. Okay, there's a reason for that. So then 27 years later, they each get a phone call from Mike saying, hey, guess what? It's Mike back in Barry. It started again. And all their memories come rushing back. So now that would be like a form of post-hypnotic suggestion, right?
Right.
Now they remember what's going on. One of them commits suicide on the spot pretty much because he literally just can't handle another.
Right.
Stan, I think.
Yeah.
What was that? Stan, yeah.
Yeah, character named Stan, yeah.
Yeah, Stan, the Jew, who Stephen King specifies ends up dying by carving crosses onto his wrists. So have fun with that one.
Yeah.
I forgot Stan was Jewish.
Yeah. In fact, I want to rabbit trail into one of the scripted scenes that never made it into the movie, which is all about his bar mitzvah. There is a part of his bar mitzvah in the movie, but not in the book. Anyhow, and so they all now start remembering what happened. And then so they go back to Derry. You know how the story goes. But in the novel, it turns out that it somehow made sure that they were financially successful in life so that they would be preoccupied with the mundane things of this world and they would forget all about it so that they would no longer come after it. All right?
Right, yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
And so you see how, again, it's a Gnostic concept of getting them all wrapped up in the material world so that they would forget about the spirit realm in a way. And also it's specified that none of them were able to have children.
Yeah.
I actually forgot about that part.
Yeah.
Not one of them had children. I did too.
Yeah, that's true.
I thought they hadn't gotten to it yet. What, Pennywise arranged that?
I think I don't know if it's explicitly stated, but it's kind of implied that he kind of pulled the cosmic strings for that to happen.
Exactly. It's not specified. It's just kind of stated. When they get back into town and they're having their first meeting at the Chinese restaurant, they talk about that. Mike specifies to them that, hey, you're all successful financially and none of you were able to have children. No details are given, but it's just like a brute fact. Like, oh, wait a minute. What is that all about?
Right, and it could be that, even though they had amnesia, something in the back of their mind said they didn't want to bring kids into this world or something too. It could be that as well, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it went a little beyond that because if I remember correctly, I've had a miscarriage or some.
Yeah,
some
it seems like she had some.
Have attempted it, right? Even if they attempted to have children, because they weren't able to for some reason.
Right.
So again, there was something about their interaction with it. I liken it to a Faustian bargain. It's not literally a Faustian bargain, but it was like material success was their reward for having made a styled, deal with the devil. Not really, but sort of kind of in the same type of metaphorical.
So I just want to go simple here. Do you believe Stephen King would have written this story specifically to get across a kind of evil anti-Christian message, or do you believe it would have been something acting on his will getting it across, or do you believe somehow just like fell into it and it worked out perfectly?
And
probably number 3.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, King is pretty clear that he's not a big fan of Christianity, at least like the fundamentalist Christianity, but at the same time, the way he writes is he sits down and, I don't know how much research he does and such, but he apparently just sits down and just pounds it out, which, and I don't know if he was still on the booze or drugs when he wrote it, but that was a factor. Yeah, so that's a factor too. So a lot of this is just like probably coming straight from his subconscious.
Right, like a stream of consciousness thing.
Yeah, he really did say that he didn't remember writing parts of it, and he doesn't remember Cujo at all.
Yeah,
And
and
he
yeah,
was he was heavy into that stuff until The Dark Half. I think may have been his first novel clean, and Tommyknockers was his last before he quit. And that's why Tommyknockers is kind of labored and heavy-handed, because he was burnt out. He was a burnout by then.
Yeah, and people have said that Tommyknockers is kind of a metaphor for his addiction, because, like, in the book, all these people become addicted to this weird alien substance, but they all become, like, psychics and creatives, but at the same time, it's destroying them.
But, I mean, if we're talking about if Stephen King is an agent or an emissary of evil, like some entity like Baphomet, no, I don't believe that. He just told a story that embodied his own catharsis. It was cathartic for him to talk about fear.
It's possible. I don't believe we have completely free will. There's always going to be something acting on it.
Well, I don't believe that. I mean, I believe free will is the gift from God. It's the burden and the blessing of being alive. That's right. What
I kind of take the I kind of take the Sartrean view that we're condemned to be free.
Yeah. Now getting into aspects of will is like very, very heavy theology, because it's not as simple as, from what I've been able to tell, and I'm probably going to bungle this because I'm not like, I'm an armchair reader, basically. We can make certain decisions, but we can't make them on our own. Like, we're always going to be kind of goaded in one direction or the other. Where we're able to actually choose, I don't know. But like it always stays there that we're not like the ultimate decision maker. It's very confusing. What would you say about that, Ken?
Let me just answer one thing about free will, and then I wanted to read a quote from King about when we got into this latest bit in thinking about his motivation behind it all. I don't have any really solid views on free will, with the exception that for me it's always important to define terms and set the table before we jump into the middle of a discussion, right? So I would say anybody, and I mean absolutely anybody, who ever discusses free will, by necessity, they're talking about restricted free will that exists only within parameters. So let me give you an example. If I say, hey, I have free will, really? Can I bend my knees, jump, and land on the moon? Well, okay, obviously not. So I don't have absolute free will. So then, no, well, we're only talking about free will about other stuff. Okay, so then we're talking about free will within parameters, right? And so whether you're talking about atheism or Reformed theologians like Calvinists, everyone uses the term free will to mean something restrictive by definition. Even God does not have absolute free will. Because, for instance, the Bible tells us God cannot lie, right? So God cannot do things that are contradictory to his nature. So absolute free will, if that means doing absolutely anything whatsoever, it doesn't exist anywhere. So whenever we talk about free will, we need to think about, okay, what parameters are we talking about? Because by our parameters there.
My parameters of that would be a little bit different. I wouldn't go as far as to say that God doesn't have free will, because I don't believe that we can. I believe that's kind of like a rationalization. Like, that's the only conclusion we can get to.
But see, God has the freedom. God has the free will to act according to his nature. Yeah, but he doesn't have free will if that means violating his nature. That's the point, is God is free to do that which he wills, because that which he wills will be in keeping with his nature.
think the answer could be a little more, I can't even come up with a good word for it, liquid than that. It's like we can only think of free will like in a human dichotomy. Like, I don't believe we can really speculate on that type of will.
Why would we think of it any other way? I mean, we are down here, we are human. Why would we think of free will in terms of the limitations being lifted supernaturally? I mean, here we are, everything we taste, touch, and see and hear. I mean, that is what we are given to understand, when we are conceived. And so why would we try to, compare God's limitlessness to us? Free will to us is, it exists. I firmly believe it exists. I mean, we do make determinations in our lives that make it go another way than it could have gone. Often the wrong choices, and we were free to make those choices. But I mean, I don't think we have to compare ourselves to God to get the answer to the free will question necessarily.
Yeah, I don't either. But what I was saying about free will for us is that from everything I've read, there is like a level to which I don't know if you initially make a choice or not, like what starts it, but you start becoming predisposed to do one thing or the other, and those things are kind of making your decisions. So it's not completely free. It is like in a parameter, but it's basically that you can become like a tool for something, a tool for like a pure will, if that makes sense.
Ken, we have about, 28 minutes remaining before our next guest. So I know we haven't made it to everything that you probably wanted to talk about. Is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of, Stephen King and it, or do you want to move on to another topic that you wanted to address before we let you go at 10?
Appreciate it. Appreciate the offer, or the open door. And just a couple of notes on King, and then maybe a few words I'll say about self-publishing, since I know that's something Zach's been talking about.
Cool.
Okay. So speaking of how an author's fiction will be motivated by something of his own real life, this is one thing I quote in the book. This is about King's real life. King witnessed one of his friends being hit by a train when he was a kid, but blacked out the experience. His family said he came home speechless and in shock after hanging out with the kid one day. They then learned of the kid's death and put the two together. And I mean, that's basically a Stephen King story right there. He experiences a trauma, a death, blacks it out, has amnesia, comes home in shock, right? And that affects the rest of his life. And now here's back to his motivation. I can't say I really understand it, but in it, he writes, this book is gratefully dedicated to my children. Kids, fiction is the truth inside the lie. And the truth of this fiction is simply enough. The magic exists. Okay, now whatever that means, right? But this is what he's
slogan put on a bookmark to sell at Barnes and Noble.
First of all, fiction is the truth inside the lie. I would have almost thought it was backwards. Fiction is the lie inside the truth, but okay.
Yeah,
and then he's telling his children.
X's comment. Let me go back and find it, because he brought up one, and I'm not like attacking him. I was wanting to elaborate on it because it kind of goes along with what you just said.
Is it Phoenix's comment about King feeling alienated by religion?
No, that's a different one. If he ever comes on, we can talk about.
Art is a placebo.
I lean. He says I lean more towards a pure idea, and that art is expressive. So he's talking about pure expression, and it seems like Phoenix would agree with King about fiction being the truth inside the lie. I'm with Ken in that I would flip it. Fiction, like, I don't believe we can have pure ideas. Like, I believe that the truth of the idea can exist there without us. And so we're only kind of like filtering it through ourselves. And in that way, we're almost like, well, I guess I would say literally subservient to the, I guess, thoughts floating out there. Not necessarily like thoughts themselves, but like, but there is a whole world of like objective truth, and it can be objective truth down here or objective spiritual truth, etc. I don't believe there's anything to say about fiction kind of going above that. If anything, I would think fiction's firmly below it. And I say that as a fiction lover, but I don't believe fiction can really be put on a pedestal because,
well, I do. So.
Well, a different type of pedestal. Like, it's like a thing like we can do as humans to, like, I guess, link our brains up, but it's still a purely human thing. We can talk about the spiritual, of course, but we can be completely wrong. Just because something is a pure expression from a person doesn't mean it's right, in my opinion, basically.
I don't view fiction as like an extracurricular, like purely enjoyment. When I read, I mean, I consider most texts to be relevant to the human question in general. I mean, I take stories.
It's a
Stories are an integral part of my life, fiction and non. And so I guess I do put them on a pedestal. That's why I read so compulsively, like 50 at once, you know, not joking. And I can finish like, you know, 5 or 6 a week, you know, doing that. And it's like they all blend over into each other. To me, that is, it's celebrating something. It's you know, it's its own whatever. I take it very seriously.
So, but Ken, I think you had something to say about the truth inside the lie thing. Like you were going to say something about what you thought that meant, right?
Yes. Incidentally, the director of the It miniseries, Tommy Lee Wallace, stated magic is the true business of show business. So anyhow, I mean, Stephen King is telling his kids the truth of this fiction is simply enough. The magic exists. So whatever he meant by that, to me it was weird that how he phrases it. The magic exists. He doesn't say the truth of this fiction is simple enough. That magic exists. That would be more sensical, but the magic exists. He's claiming that is the truth in his fiction, in this story. Magic exists, whatever that means. Okay.
That's actually, it just made me remember, I guess, where I was going with my kind of inarticulate spiel is that King is basically saying that there is truth in this fiction and the magic exists, meaning he believes that he can, with his rational human mind, like get into like concrete truth about spirituality. I would argue that none of us can do that. And that's why something like the Bible, or basically just the Bible, is above us. See, that's the kind of Gnostic thing that King's doing. He believes that he can rationally create this type of truth that kind of, I would say, inverts real truth, which has to be handed down to us. And it just gets really messy, but at the end of it, it's pointless because no one takes it to mean like a literal spiritual thing. He's just kind of, I guess, jerking himself off there. Like, I don't get why he believes there's importance to the story. It baffles me. He would actually.
Well, I mean, even if you take away the supernatural aspects, it's still ultimately like a coming of age story and a story about, like we were talking about, how people deal with trauma. And, you know, you can write a nonfiction book about how, you know, trauma affects kids and so forth, but in certain ways, the certain ineffable truths about human experience comes through a bit more clearly through narratives than it does through just nonfiction works. And
I agree.
I mean,
the only point where I jump off, like, I believe we can talk about human coming of age and it be completely, amazing in fiction. I mean, I love fiction, but I don't believe you can go that step further and say that, where King's saying he thinks he's actually getting at some sort of truth. it's almost like he's not admitting that he's just a simple, rational human being. Like he
Well,
thinks.
why would a writer?
Well,
Why
I
would a
mean,
writer think his work is significant? Jeez,
I mean, Stephen King, like in a lot of interviews I've said, comes out and says, like, I'm just a pulp writer. I'm just a salami maker, and I'm just hoping I'm making good salami.
Yeah, I like that more. That's the King I like.
But he was admittedly high during this, time period, right?
Why would a writer think that his novel actually meant something? I mean, wow. I mean,
That's not what I'm saying.
I don't understand.
I'm saying the human aspects of it can be amazing and beautiful, but you can't take it the step further and say that he's like almost inventing like a spiritual truth. I don't believe he can do that.
Well, I don't know that he's actually trying to, but maybe he is.
Yeah, I don't know what his
going based on
spirituality are. And I mean, when he says like the magic is there, I mean, I don't know if he means literal magic.
Yeah, like
right, or the magic of childhood. Who knows, right? I don't know. Nobody knows what he means by that.
Noble, but
It's that heady literary stuff, like magic of being alive, magic. I don't think it's some sinister Baphomet worship, personally. But
so Zach, have you read it?
I have, but
I have too, but I read it way back in high school.
I've only seen the miniseries and the first.
Okay, I read it probably within the last 5 to 7 years. It's definitely my favorite King novel. I've read it for the first time within the past 5 to 7 years. I mean, it's great. I mean, a lot of people want to say The Stand is his best thing. I mean, I personally think it is his best thing that I've read, at least by far. Right? I love it way more than I like The Stand. I didn't really like The Stand. So, So Ken, is it a favorite King novel of yours, or did you just want to dissect it because you found all these themes in it that you wanted to explore?
Let me just quote one thing by King, another thing. He says, I think of the most awful things I could take up and pass them on to you. I get paid, you get nightmares.
Right.
The thing is, I've never read much horror. I've been a horror movie fan, but not read much horror.
Right.
There was a time I read everything Clive Barker had published, at least in the U.S., but I was not really into King. But I heard of a buddy of mine named Isaac Weishaupt. He did a podcast talking about some of the deeper meaning of it. And I go, halfway listening to him, half through his show, I thought, okay, I got to write a book about this.
Right.
And so I plowed through the movie, the miniseries, the 2 movies, and started looking up what everybody involved had to say about it. And that's okay, like I explained before, what captures my interest more than anything is the backstory, the motivation, the worldview, the philosophy. So when I got a hint that there was something going on behind the scenes of this story, that's what really captured me. Okay.
All right. So you'd never read it as a pure work of fiction, as far as just, hey, I want to enjoy this book, right? As a pure, you went into it with a particular background, or you knew a little bit about the mythos already and everything, and some of the more esoteric aspects of it already. And that's part of what the reason is that you went into it to read it, right?
Yeah, I would say both. Again, like I said about movies, both. I read the novel for what it was, and then I read it as a researcher.
So did you like it as a novel?
I did, in terms of the stereotypical King modus operandi we talked about already. That is also almost exactly the same as in Dreamcatcher. These kids undergo traumatic experiences. They suffer amnesia.
Right.
Their adulthood, they're forced to face them again, and that's what brought them and kept them together. That was I think what a lot of people really love about King's writing.
Right.
In what is it, Lean on Me or whatever?
Stand by Me.
Yeah,
the body.
Yeah. So that's very typical stuff in King, and I think that's really it endears characters to you, because you feel so much for them, and you cheer for them, and you see how they're relying on each other for strength, and you feel bad that they're going through these horrible family lives and all of that.
Right. So you wanted to talk, Ken, about authorship. It seems like you've mentioned that a
Yes.
couple different times, right? And it seems like we've gotten sidetracked.
No, that's
and-
fine.
Yes.
That's what initially led me. So Zachary was on with my buddy William Ramsey, and one thing
Mhm.
they talked about is self-publishing. What was that about? So if I could, yeah, just go into that for a little while. So let's see.
We got about 14 minutes before my next guest. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I started writing maybe almost 20 years ago. And I don't know if most people could remember what the internet was like back then, but it wasn't what it is today.
Right.
And so I started writing and talked to a publisher. And the guy says, well, for example, the index will cost $300-400. I go, well, the index? You mean the thing at the back of the book with the words and numbers? Yeah, that's going to cost me $300 or $400. I'll do it myself.
Right.
So in more modern times, a buddy of mine paid $700 just for his book cover. Okay, so now if you're an unknown nobody like me, it's going to cost you a lot of money to publish a book. You're talking maybe $1,000, maybe a little bit less. And I mean, I always joke that I should know my own canon, but I don't really know how many books I've published, maybe 45. And I'm not wealthy, so I literally can't do that. I literally can't afford to do that. So now self-publishing, I think, has had a bad name for a long time because people thought, oh, self-publishers, they're people who couldn't cut it. They couldn't get their work published, and so they just published it themselves. You know, there might be some truth to that. I'm sure that's true for a lot of people, but for a lot of us, we ended up thinking, okay, I can't afford to have my book published. It's going to cost me a ton of money. And so, hey, I'm going to self-publish because that means many things to me. It means I own it. It means I keep it. It means when I want to update something, I just update it. And it means I can write about whatever I want.
Yeah, I think you were getting publishing confused with vanity publishing, because how I've been published is like just traditional publishing, where like I don't have to pay anything. Like it's just all I get's a cut of the royalties, but like I put no money up.
Yeah, with traditional publishing, the only time you pay the publisher is if you need to get like additional copies for yourself, and even then, like you're supposed to be able to buy them at cost.
Yeah, but that's not like an actual publishing cost. That's just buying the physical books after they're already published.
And someone's going to have to tell me who these people are, because anyone I've contacted and let them know, hey, I'm an author, I'm interested in publishing, they're like, well, here's our package. You pay this much up front, and that was the end of it.
Yeah,
Those
that's
are
what
vanity
they call
publishers.
Yeah, those are vanity press, where they're basically, they're just basically offering you services, and all these services, at least, I mean, back in the day, right? They're basically offering you the services that a traditional publisher would provide for free, and the traditional publisher would take on all of the risk, right? Whereas the vanity press is simply just making money off the author and not taking any of the risk. All the financial capital and risk is put on the author to take the risk, right? So that's what the vanity presses were.
So that's
Right.
maybe where I'm stuck, because I write things that are within maybe a couple of pretty obscure genres. So it was difficult for me to find out, well, what publisher can I write to and ask them about it? And necessarily it had to be kind of publishers that focus on certain genres. And so in a way, it's been a blessing and a curse. I'll tell you the most difficult thing about self-publishing is marketing.
Right.
Yeah.
Marketing is incredibly expensive, and it's something that you have to do on your own, and something I haven't quite figured out yet.
Yeah, even with just like a small press, like figuring out how to market yourself is a nightmare.
Right, because, okay, so I can self-publish and I'm on Amazon. There you go. I'm worldwide, literally. But then I'm an extremely tiny little drop in a gigantic ocean of author, right? So in a way, I like the freedom. I like that I own everything. I like that I can write anything. In a way, you're just kind of invisible, but who knows? That's another aspect of it. But what I did like about it is being able to do my own thing. I mean, I make my own book covers.
Right.
And I'll tell you another difficulty. Personally, English is my fourth language, and I don't even have a second or third, so figure that out. That's a bad joke. Actually, English is my second language, and I'm also dyslexic, and I also don't have an editor, so that's like a perfect storm. So that can make it really difficult for me. I'm checking the Word program for grammar as I'm writing, and then I'll run it through Grammarly, and then I'll print a copy and I'll edit it by hand. But inevitably, there's still stuff I miss because my brain just doesn't work in the way that it'll catch stuff just because of the dyslexia. I'm not seeing what's there.
Which I wouldn't feel too bad about, because even books by the big four or big three, however many there are left, you go through them, is like you'll still find mistakes in them.
I mean, don't you have a buddy or an author pal that you can do like an in-kind trade for proofreading or something?
No, just because the amount of writing I do just overwhelms people, honestly.
Okay, all right.
I did have somebody who wrote to me and offered, somebody I knew said, I'll review your stuff. And then when he got a look at how much material I had, he's like, okay, this can't happen.
Right.
I mean, this most recent book alone, 8.5 by 11 size, is over 500 pages, and 69, it's like 1,000. Just that one single book.
Right.
And you wrote that in 12 days?
Well, I don't know if it was 12 days. It might have been 3 weeks or a month. Honestly, time's been flying for me ever since the stay-at-home thing. Literally flying.
So what is your mother tongue? You said that English was your second language.
Yes, it's Spanish, technically Castilian.
Okay.
Slightly different, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I did not know that. So I did want to ask you something about one of your books, and it's this one, The Occult Roots of Postgenderism.
Oh, yes.
So tell me a little bit about the concept of that, or what's going on there, because I mean I'm very curious about it. It seems like there is. Let me just ask you that question and let you answer it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the subtitle is "And the History of Changes to Psychology and Psychiatry."
Right.
So, okay, yeah. Well, you picked a doozy, didn't you?
Yeah.
The verifiable fact of the matter, and I'm saying that because now it doesn't really matter what I think about it or you think about it. The simple fact that's verifiable is that concept of transgenderism or hermaphroditism or androgyny or mixing of the genders is all over occult literature, and it always has been. It's absolutely saturated with those concepts.
Right.
So it's it derives from a worldview philosophy that views one single divine gender as a perfect unity, and it views the gender binary, right, male and female, as something that is bad because it denotes disconnection. There's one and there's two. Not one. There's one and there's two. Rather, there's two, not one.
Right.
And two they view as an imbalance. And perfect balance is to combine them or recombine them. And this is where occultism starts telling you that some sort of combination by whatever means is best. And this is also manifested symbolically in concepts of alchemy, where you see a lot of depictions, paintings, and illustrations of dual-gendered beings that are also stand-in for descriptions about how to combine different chemicals, because of course chemistry came out of alchemy. And so that's what the book is about. all this stuff about, well, let me go back to the term postgenderism.
Mhm.
I didn't make up that term. It came out of a peer-reviewed journal paper, and it's the concept that you just get to the point where it's not just male, and it's not just female, and it's not just a combination of them. It's something beyond, which is pretty much where we are right now, at least conceptually, where we're being told that self-identification molds reality, right? Whatever I self-identify as being, that's what I am. And this goes back to what we've been talking about in our discussion about it, which is a battle of the wills.
Right.
Magic, and I mean true magic with a CK,
Right.
is about that exact concept. If I will something into existence, then I get to determine reality. So it used to be if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, then it's a duck. Now it's if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's whatever it self-identifies as being.
Right.
Right? So that it is a fundamental level attack upon God's created order and a deconstruction of it that forces it to be subservient to my will, because I am now the determiner of what is reality, even if it's not verifiably so. Even if any rational person could say, no, that's not actual reality. Well, now that's hate speech, and you can't say
Right.
that because what I say goes. And so that's what the book is about, is just quote after quote after quote after quote of occult writer after occult writer after occult writer talking about this stuff and how it's been...
That is a horrifying face image.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
That's what he
And,
had.
you know,
Hi, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No worries. Glad to have you. But I'm reaching my my deadline here. So one of you mentioned Baphomet earlier, and well, that's exactly what you have in Baphomet. You have
Right.
the female breast and the male phallus combined, the moon and the sun, and you have on its forearms the concept of dissolving and coagulating, which is right
Right.
out of alchemy.
Right.
And then the other part of the book is history of the changes to psychology and psychiatry, which is that psychologists and psychiatrists would have in their official literature that these kind of issues of body dysmorphia were mental problems. Obviously, if you're looking in the mirror and you're not really seeing what's really there, that's not a physical problem, that's a mental disorder. But then all of a sudden they're saying, no, guess what, that's perfectly healthy and we should support it, even if we're going to conduct open experiments on children, loading them up with all kinds of hardcore pharmaceuticals that'll never even allow their central nervous system to develop the way it was meant to. And so the point of the change is that the literature, the psychological and psychiatric literature itself, again, not me making stuff up, what they are saying is that they're changing their views, not based on science, but based on socio-political activism. They're extremely open about that. So the way society goes, then they go. And that's exactly what they're saying.
And that's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think I have to take a look at that book because that seems like a very interesting topic. It's somewhat controversial, and I'd like to see how you tie that all together.
And see, that's one of the things I like most, when I'm able to say, hey, this is verifiable. This isn't just Ken shooting off his mouth.
Right.
Yeah, Ken's opinions are in there. Yeah. Ken's speculations are in there. Yeah. But Ken's providing you every kind of quotation you could ever want from the sources themselves.
Right.
Okay. Well, it looks like we need to wrap this up soon because Jeff Strand is about ready to come on. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with before you go, Ken?
No, if I can be a plugger, I would say come on over to truefreethinker.com, and everything you could ever want pertaining to me is there. And gents, I definitely appreciate the invitation. This has been absolutely fascinating. Really, really interesting. And you guys are sharp. I mean, you guys hit so many nails on so many heads that were just dead on. And I really appreciate that, because sometimes I get into obscure stuff and people don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you have to go way back.
On
Yeah.
top of it.
Yeah. We'll definitely try to have you on again at some other
Yeah, for sure.
some of your
Appreciate
other
it very
subjects.
much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Hey, have a good evening. Thank you.
Farewell.
Yeah.
Farewell.
Thanks for coming on.